Now that we have Terrence, we can have a party. So tonight, our speaker, Terrence Carroll, uh, was raised in Washington, D.C., graduate of Morehouse College, 1992. Iliff School of Theology with a Master's of Divinity in 1999. Sounds like a Harvard Divinity School Center for Studies of Public Life. Was that like a fellowship, Terrence?
Oh, that was a fellowship.
Yeah. And then the Sturm College of Law, University of Denver. He's actively practicing at Sherman and Howard LLC. He's also actively practicing as a ordained Baptist minister. And one thing that we share in common is that we're both Eagle Scouts. And
Oh,
I wanted to ask you just to kick things off, Terrence, what did you have a good service project for your Eagle Scout?
I don't really remember what it was now.
Oh, you don't? It didn't change your life?
I'm going to say it did for the record.
Yeah, yeah. I had to go for 6 months every Saturday. I would go to the Humane Society and clean dog pens, and I got to meet the lions. There was a really popular Born Free, I guess, there was a popular thing back in the 70s, and, so it was good. But I think we agreed that behind every Eagle Scout is a motivated mother.
That is very true. That,
Yeah. And Beth, I had Terrence and I had spoken before, and we said that we could make him co-host to share his screen to be able to put his slide deck up.
Yep, he should be able to.
okay. Let's see. Share screen. There must be a way to do this one. I don't know if it says, oh, share. Here we go.
Hey, we got you.
Okay. Oh, here I am. See, start. This is all new for me. Oh, kind of. Here we are. We're good.
Oh, and Terrence, I didn't mention your past history of work in the legislature as Speaker of the Colorado House as well. I didn't want to neglect that either.
Oh no, that's past history.
But it probably wasn't an easy history.
No one remembers that anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff. Beth, thanks for getting this together. I think I saw Vita Lance Brown on there somewhere.
Vida's here.
So, Vita, how are you? I think I just saw her on Sunday. Um, I'm actually the interim pastor at her church right now, Macedonia Baptist Church, Denver's historic Macedonia Baptist Church, as I like to remind us, everyone 108 years old. So what
Wow.
I'll do is I'll go through the slides, give you an overview of what my new project is, what we're trying to do, and I'll just say we're at a very early stage with this, um, and how we imagine it and how we're constructing it. But overall, if you see, look at the first slide, it says exactly what it is. It's a faith-rooted initiative for justice and compassion and democratic renewal. And I've decided to say, instead of saying faith-based, I think I invented the word faith-rooted. I'm not sure if I did, but if I didn't, it's mine now, to talk about what we're doing. I like the word rooted because it has more of a sense of groundedness to it than saying something is faith based, because this is really grounded and rooted and is enriched and has its source of energy in faith. So, who are we? It feels weird to say who are we because it's just me at the moment, but I have a lot of folks who are interested in being more involved. So, we're committed to reimagining democracy as a moral and spiritual project. That's how we understand it, how I understand it, and how it's going to be constructed at the end of the day. Because democracy is a moral and spiritual project from my perspective. And the reason I started thinking about it this way is that there's so many folks who are faith adjacent or faith rooted or faith based who aren't Christian nationalists. And so many people in the world think that, the folks who are involved in democracy right now and who are framing the conversation around democracy are folks that really don't necessarily care about our democratic or our experiment we call democracy. To the extent they want to be involved in democracy, they want to leverage democracy as a tool to control other people and create a world where it's clearly the world is whatever they think the world is, and any other notions, any other voices in the public sphere are null and void. And so what we would like to do, and what I would like to do, is reimagine democracy as a moral project and understand how important the moral components of democracy are to creating a United States and to creating an America that really, as Dr. King says, is true to the words that it says it is on paper. And it says a little bit about me: former Speaker of the House, ordained Baptist minister, attorney, been to too many schools, and I'm starting school again next month. I'm at United Theological Seminary to get my doctorate degree in preaching and public theology. I'm a glutton for punishment. So our vision is to use faith-informed moral leadership to transform democracy. And when I talk about transforming democracy, I'm not just talking about civic engagement. I'm talking about the very underpinnings of how we understand what democracy is. Because when we read the Declaration of Independence, we read the preamble to the Constitution, even though those are all high words. I mean, high values, high ideals that we're trying to achieve. And there are also moral ideas that underpin our democracy and our democratic experiment. Sometimes the ideals that we have not fully lived up to. And when we talk about, well, I'll talk about this a little bit more. When we talk about transforming democracy, it is about making democracy live up to those high standards, that are listed by, the writers of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So this is our mission statement. And I'll make this deck available if anybody wants to see it afterwards. I'll get it over to Jeff or Beth, and if anybody wants it, he can distribute it around to folks. So our basic mission is convene, connect, and catalyze diverse faith communities and faith-rooted leaders committed to justice, compassion, and reimagining democracy reform as a moral, theological, and spiritual project. In short, I want to give people and help people of faith develop language around how we engage in democracy, and language that is useful for people of faith who are engaging in a secular context, so that we can participate fully in the public square and the give and take of the public square in a way that's appropriate, that in a way that is mindful of other voices that are not like our voices, or not like faith voices in the public square. So our value statement: we believe democracy has to be animated by moral courage, and that people should bring their full moral selves into public life. Prophetic imagination. I'm a son of the Black church. And one of the things that we always talk about in the Black church is that you have to have a prophetic voice. And that prophetic voice is speaking up on behalf of those people who are disinherited, those people who are left on the margins of society, those people who don't necessarily always have a voice that's heard in democracy. Justice and compassion. We have to champion justice and compassion in public life. There's some folks out there now who are saying that empathy is a sin. Otherwise, in other words, they're saying that compassion is something that we don't need in public life. And I don't know about the rest of you all. When folks say that we don't need compassion or empathy, I believe they're just looking for an excuse to be cruel at the end of the day. Faith-rooted engagement. It's grounded fundamentally in our faith and faith of all perspectives, because I do believe that although people of faith may have different ways of praying, different perspectives on who they're praying to, but there's some fundamentals, some intersections that we can all agree on, that we can all work from to transform our democracy, to make our democracy actually more moral, more caring, more empathetic at the end of the day. And we also want to make sure that our democracy serves all people, especially those people who democracy has failed to serve. These are our three core pillars: convene faith communities and leaders, connect actors, connect people across theological and cultural lines. I think one of the biggest problems we have with people of faith engaging in public life, is that we don't engage across those theological and cultural lines on a regular basis in an ecumenical way, in a multi-faith way, and we need to do that. Catalyze action for justice, compassion, and democratic reform. This is really about providing resources to faith communities, and developing curriculum and developing talking points and helping people understand how to use their faith backgrounds and their faith commitments to engage in a proactive, positive, and holistic way in the public square. So these are the premises that I started with, and they build on each other. The first one is democracy is morally neutral on its own. I'm not one to argue that democracy is morally superior to any other form of government. Baseline democracy is neutral, which leads us to the next point. We assume that democracy takes on the moral character and the theological purposes of those people who shape it. And we're seeing that today in our government, is that the people who are talking about democracy, and I'm going to expose my biases briefly, I would argue their moral character is suspect, and we're seeing that in how they envision democracy in this current administration. And then leads to my final premise, is that efforts to preserve and protect democracy must themselves be moral, theological, and spiritual. Years ago, and there's still a movement around this that talks about democracy, it talks about American civic faith and American civic religion. And that's kind of what we're dovetailing into, is that there's a certain moral element into how our founders envisioned democracy. And when I talk about theology and spiritual aspects, there's this civic sense of what American theology is around democracy at its core, which is that we believe that in America, that I'm trying to find the best way to describe this, and I'm drawing blank because I always go back to the Declaration of Independence, that we fundamentally believe in liberty, and we fundamentally believe in freedom, and we fundamentally believe that democracy should create an environment where people can live their lives to be their full selves, and that they can fully explore all aspects of being human in this democracy, no matter what that looks like to you, as long as your being human does not negatively impact my ability to live my life. I almost sound like a libertarian, but at the end of the day, though, whether you're black, brown, gay, lesbian, or whatever, or wherever you come from, or whoever your family is, the structures of our democracy should not limit your ability to live out your life fully and completely. So why does this matter? If we read any of the research, democracy and church are facing a crisis. I shouldn't say church. I'm a churchy person. I should have said faith institutions. I'm going to fix that in the slide. But I'm a Baptist preacher. I default to saying church. And so please, charge it to my head and not my heart on this one. But we'll just say church for now. When you look at Pew's research, both on democracy and the church, people don't trust either one. Folks feel like democracy is failing your average everyday person, especially those people who live on the margins. And then with the emergence of the religious right, and more recently Christian nationalism, people don't believe that there's actually God in faith, uh, for lack of a better term at this point. And so, why does faithful witness matter in this regard? Based on my research and what I've and working on this for the last year or two, to think about whether this is actually that's something that's needed, because I don't really believe in just creating a new project because I want to stoke my ego. It's like, is this something that's actually needed? Is this something that will actually move the needle? And I say yes, because what makes this different than the rest of the democracy movement, and I should pause for a second and say that I'm so happy to see that the League of Women Voters is actively engaging in conversations around faith and democracy and what that means, because so many people in organizations in the democracy space don't take seriously the role of faith in democracy, and how much people and how your average everyday person is actually committed to their faith. And then many of us in the democracy reform space don't know how to talk about democracy from a faith-based perspective, to folks who still hold on to their faith, people like me. And if I feel like people in the faith in the space aren't really speaking to me, and I'm embedded in the space, I assume that there are other folks who are like me, who aren't embedded, who have a similar feeling, that need to understand why our theological commitments have to have an undercurrent of how do we improve democracy as a moral project. And when I say it's tested in politics, I will say that's more about me. Is that, I'm not naive about politics. For better or for worse, I'm firmly grounded in political wars. I still have the scars for them. I know how to talk politics. I know the real world of politics. And then finally, this is the part that really goes to how I've been formed in the crucible of faith, is that I believe that we're at a time in history where we have to be driven by moral courage and prophetic imagination. In other words, we can't be afraid to speak truth to power at this point in history. And I have two major theological role models for this. One is the great Howard Thurman, whose seminal work is Jesus and the Disinherited. And then the other one is the great Prathia Hall, who Dr. King once said about her, the only person I don't like to speak behind is Prathia Hall. And she has this one, she's one of the founders of womanist theology, and it's centered around this idea of called freedom faith, that faith has no moral legitimacy unless your faith leads to the freedom of those people who've been oppressed. So those are the things that influence me at the end of the day. So our approach, faith-rooted convenings that bring together diverse theological voices to have hard conversations about what does it look like for us as people of faith to engage in civic discourse and to engage in democracy. Political engagement informed by our spiritual values. I mean, one of the things I do every day, I pray for those people who are political leaders, both elected and appointed. And one of the things when I pray is that they be guided by the fruit of the Spirit, which is something in the Christian tradition comes out of the book of Galatians, that you lead with love, you lead with empathy, you lead with grace, you lead with mercy, and those are my spiritual values that inform my political engagement. And then finally, education and formation, equipping leaders with moral and democratic vision, helping folks talk about their faith in a way that's constructive and empowering. I think I have the same slide, yeah. So interfaith gatherings, the next part, toolkits, and then build a network of folks. This is one of the reasons I'm here today, is to start to create a network. Even though I'm not officially off the ground yet, it's not too late to network. And I love the League of Women Voters. So even when I was in the legislature, I worked a lot with the League of Women Voters. So I'm glad that you opened your doors to me today. So this is the call to action. Every good sermon, although I did not preach today, every good sermon always has to have a call to action at the end of the day. Get involved when we get stood up, join our convenings and our networks, partner with us, and then spread the word, share the vision with your faith community and those around you. And so let's journey together toward a democracy animated by faith, moral courage, and prophetic imagination. And thank you. And again, I want to thank you again because this is the first time I've done this presentation. So you're my presentation guinea pigs. And so I'm thankful that you allowed me to walk through this with you when I'm still forming it in my brain. So thank you.
Thank you. How do you plan to launch this, Terrence?
That's a good question. Um, I do have a theory of change around launching this, and part of it is, and I don't want this to sound like it's my ego, but part of this launching is leveraging my own credibility and my own networks and my own access to media and folks like that to start writing about these issues, um, going on podcasts and doing things like this. And so it's going to be a soft launch for now, which is what we're doing, eventually into a hard launch.
Wonderful. Do you have time for a few questions?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Any questions, y'all? Bonnie?
Hi. Where are you located?
I live in Denver.
Denver. Okay, so your work, is it going to be primarily outreach in Colorado?
Yes, initially.
Okay. And are you familiar with the organization called Together Colorado?
I am.
Okay, because they seem like that would be a natural partnership kind of thing.
And years ago, under their previous name, I did a lot of work with Ray.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
And we're a little
Sure.
different than other Colorado because they're more geared towards direct action, and I use that more loosely in terms of trying to change in terms of policy and things like that. This is not necessarily, and they're also more engaged, more geared towards civic engagement. What we're more geared for with Faithful Witness is about reforming democracy, ensuring that people can still be engaged civically, that the
Right.
structures and institutions of democracy are still preserved and kept whole, and even reformed to allow for greater access to our institutions by a broader range of people.
Okay. Yeah.
Terrence, as a kid, I was kind of a religious mutt. I was baptized Methodist. I was brought up Lutheran. Then we transitioned to a Presbyterian church. And then I was married in the Greek Orthodox Church.
Oh,
Probably I should, try Judaism for a little while just to, round out the crowd. But I think today I find myself as a deist, a person who believes in a higher spirit. I don't know who that is. I don't know how that higher spirit controls our world, but it's always sort of grated me to when people feel that religion has ownership of morals and ethics. I'm just not sure how I evolved into what I believe. I might be a little biased on this point, but how I evolved into a rather moral and a rather ethical adult. Is there a space in your organization for individuals like myself who, believe that we have faith, but we're not really organized in a faith tradition?
absolutely. That's why I use the term faith rooted, and I try to avoid the word religious in anything that I've said in the entire presentation. And so I gear towards faith-rooted organizations, which does not mean religious institutions like churches, synagogues, or sanctuaries exclusively.
Yeah.
It could be anything. It could be your book club, and your book club reads a bunch of books on spirituality and faith. And if you want to be engaged as your book club is welcome. It could be someone who's a theist or a deist in the inner tradition of Thomas Jefferson, for example, who famously cut out the parts of the Bible he didn't agree with. Uh, it includes those folks as well. So it's anyone who really believes that there's a moral and ethical dimension to our democratic experiment. And at the core of that moral and ethical dimension is that democracy has to be for all and by all in order for
Mhm.
democracy to be true. I mean, if because there's a moral component to this idea that government is of the people and for the people. There's a moral
Sure.
component in that.
Yeah, you bet. Carol?
Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, just a real quick question about it. On May 1st, the president issued an executive order establishing the Religious Liberty Commission. Would you say, Terrence, that your organization would be in a total different direction than what that commission has been set up to address?
Yeah, that commission, and I'll speak frankly, is not a religious liberty commission at all. What it is a commission for them to create a framework to justify using their narrow religious beliefs to coerce the rest of us to live in a world based on their narrow religious beliefs. And so it's really creating a structure where they want to pretend that this narrow band of Christianity is in actuality a persecuted group within the United States, which is almost farcical. Well, actually, not almost, it is farcical when you think that the group they're trying to protect from having their rights impinged upon is probably the most um, uh, privileged and powerful group of Christians in the world.
Talia?
I'm curious about how you can affect a national conversation about what democracy means when, for my lifetime, democracy is seems to be based in free enterprise system, economics, and that's how our leaders often couch their conversations about democracy. It's like free enterprise, everybody's free to make money, but that eliminates the whole moral side of the conversation. It seems to me that your organization and ours as well has a heavy lift.
We do have a heavy lift, and I'm thankful that I come out of a faith tradition where we have constantly talked about the prophetic, and in the sense that that when you have a country that is solely focused on how do we create a system where we can maximize profit. Where I come from, we challenge that constantly because a system that's so narrowly focused on that leads to immoral outcomes because the means always justifies the ends. And so that's what makes this project more important, even more important because you do have to inject that democracy. That democracy is not about the means of production. And that's where folks are confused. They talk about democracy as if democracy is an economic theory, and democracy is not an economic theory. It's a system that provides a broad framework about how diverse groups of people live together in society without killing each other, to put it in the most plain, most, blunt sense. And in order to create that type of system, there has to be some moral and ethical foundations. The moral part being what's inside of you. I mean, what are your personal views about how you relate to other folks? And then the ethical part being what it is, how does that play out in the real world? And the problem that we have with democracy right now is democracy's been divorced from any moral and ethical obligations and how we treat each other. It's more about, how can I exercise power over someone who's powerless, and how can I control and how can I beat down my political enemies. That indicates a dearth of values in our democratic system and in the democratic process. If it is only about owning the liberals, or if it's only about beating down MAGA, uh, our politics can't be that. Our democracy can't be about tribalism, and that's really what it is. And once it becomes tribalism, you can justify anything in the name of protecting your tribe. And what I hope to do is to change the dialogue so that we're not justifying anything in the name of the tribe, but we're clearly are making moral and ethical decisions based on what's good for morally and theologically and spiritually for all of us. And that doesn't mean imposing any one group's religious beliefs or faith inclinations on anyone else. It's about how do we come together of people of various moral and ethical and spiritual and faith and religious backgrounds to have those tough conversations about what does it really mean for us in this democratic nation to live together? What are the norms and the values that we all agree upon that democracy must insist upon? And it can't just be about the profit and the bottom line, because we already see what's happening in this country, where that's the moral, or I should say the immoral impetus of so much in public policy.
Thank you. I agree.
Mina.
It's just a simple question. When we talk about, about 25, 30 years ago, we had all these books that were written about how American civil religion was going to impact everything, where people believed that they were Christian just because they were born in the United States. It doesn't mean that they do anything religious. They don't attend church. They just believe that, and that would be a threat on religion in the United States and also on democracy. And I just really kind of like your opinion on that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a student of sorts of American civil religion or civic faith. And it's a sociological movement, which was never meant to assume that by being born in the United States, that makes you Christian, that makes you a party to Christian faith and Christian traditions. And that's far from the truth. And it's really a notion that comes from more fundamentalists, and at least their interpretation of American civic faith, which is absolutely wrong, comes from a more fundamentalist and I don't want to say evangelical, because I'm trying to reclaim that word for those of us who do have more of an orthodox theology. But it comes from that Falwell group, and they imagine the United States was a Christian nation founded on Christian principles, despite the fact that, all the research and even the words of the founders of this nation completely are opposed to that. I mean, the actual notion behind American civic faith is based on these core principles embedded in the writings of the founders, in the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers. And I'm convinced that most Federalists have never really, members of the Federalist Society have never really read the Federalist Papers, or they would have a different worldview, I suspect, or the writings of Thomas Paine, or even what Thomas Jefferson wrote, for instance, in the letter to the Danbury Christians, things, the Danbury Baptist Association. So the idea behind American civic faith should really be that we have these core principles we all agree on. It's that, that American democracy, and I don't know why I normally have the Declaration of Independence on the tip of my tongue, but for some reason today I'm having I'm having a brain dump of of the words I'm trying to pull up, and I'm like, really, how's this not working? So I just had to pull it up.
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Now, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the core, as I understand it, of American civic faith. And how do you make that live out in the real world? And this country's always struggled with that. I just finished a book recently called The Civil War as Theological Crisis, about how this country was forced to deal with slavery as a theological crisis. How slavery, when you think about it, was adversarial to American civic faith. If you believe that all men are created equal, all humans are created equal, it's adversarial to that very notion. And so that created a theological crisis, which is one of the things that created the conditions for the American Civil War. And in fact, I'm a Baptist, and it created a split between the Baptist and the Baptist folks. We ended up going from one main Baptist thing to the Southern Baptists, which wanted to keep slaves, and the American Baptists who were like, yeah, we got to be abolitionists. In fact, we're not going to ordain you if you own slaves and you're a minister. So I think part of my project is also reframing what American civic faith is, because there are folks who aren't going to necessarily want to engage in God talk, but they can engage in the moral talk that comes along with American civic faith. And I think the person who first came up with that notion was a sociologist named Robert Buehler. I believe that's his name. So he's written in most about it. I think he's long past now.
Boy, Terrence, I've had a great time falling back into the Civil War, and read a good book recently, Mr. Lincoln's Peace. And it was about the concept that the Civil War never really actually ended. And the whole point of the book was, well, when did it end? Was it at Appomattox when Lee surrendered? Was it on Juneteenth in Galveston, when the announcement of slaves were free? But it seems like it just continually keeps the spirit alive of separation, particularly and historically in the 1860s and 70s, leave it to Texas. That's where everything was, where everybody was raising hell, because everyone took their slaves to Texas thinking that they would be free to keep their slaves if they stayed with that. But I think, you're right on target there with the fact that perhaps these concepts still live within our society, this separation. And it's a tough job to pull those folks together, but I believe that's what you're striving for.
Yeah, I mean, no imagination will be an easy task. And I will say that I agree with you. The Civil War may not have there was an opportunity for the Civil War to end, but I argue, and I'm just throwing stuff on the wall at this point, because you got something going in my brain here. Is that the Civil War had an opportunity to actually end, and we had an opportunity to have a real reconstruction of the Union. But there are two major things that stopped that from happening: the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, which caused Vice President Johnson to become president. And he was never really about ending slavery and an avowed racist to his core, who was more concerned about bringing the wealthy Southern landowners back into the fold. The second, you know, um, the radical Republicans in Congress at the time forced him to push through strong measures, but he was always half-hearted. What ended Reconstruction, which is the second thing that kept us in this perpetual state of the lost cause, which is what we're still suffering from to this day, is the Hayes-Tilden Compromise of 1876. And the aftermath of the Hayes-Tilden Compromise was that Reconstruction was ended. Federal troops were pulled from the South and allowed wealthy Southern landowners to, in effect, wage a coup on democracy in the South, which caused many of the Black, if not all, the Black elected officials to be removed from office and institute what I would call, well, actually, it's called Jim Crow, institute Jim Crow. And some people would argue that what we're seeing today is a ham-handed attempt at creating, at embracing the worst, and I'm going to say ham-handed, but embracing the worst instincts of Jim Crowism and trying to racially purify this country. Because at the heart of the lost cause movement, which came out of the Civil War, is this idea that America is essentially a white man's country, a white Protestant man's country. So, yeah. So we know, and I'm stuttering because I'm like, you got something going in my brain, and so I'm just kind of, as the hip hop artists go, I'm just freestyling at this point.
Yeah. Well, this is what we need to do to get your program up and running. Yeah, but I think that concept of the Civil War and the residual social and amoral responses continue till today.
Yeah,
Nancy?
absolutely.
Hi, parents. I want to commend you for your project and your work. And some of what you say is reminding me of it.
I say I'm gonna let somebody know and never tell nobody.
Yeah, Nancy, I'm having a hard time understanding you. You're kind of muffled.
Oh, I don't know.
How you gonna put my husband's car light in the drawer and close up the drawer so James can't hear nothing? Got me messed up. So after he was only there, honey, they took him Friday at 3 o'clock. We was out of there. Monday
Jeff or
by-
Beth, can you mute Vida? There we go. She did it. Okay.
Try it again, Nancy. Try it again.
I feel like I'm listening to an echo.
It's coming through.
Nancy, could you type it in the text? Your audio is not good.
Yeah.
Could you type it in the chat? Your
Yeah.
audio is not good.
Terrence, while we're waiting on Nancy's question, I'm excited, a little afraid, and looking at August 5th as an opportunity when I go to a local training session from an organization called the Patriot Academy. And what I am going to be learning for a day, which includes a barbecue lunch, which sold me. But what I'll be learning for a day is biblical citizenship. Any pointers on how a guy like me can navigate this day? You know, I'll get through lunch okay, I know that. But
Anytime I hear something called Patriot anything,
yeah,
I immediately get all sorts of like red flags go up. So you're making yourself go through this for some reason?
well, we've had a really challenging time with the GOP in Gunnison, and I'm sure this is going to be the core group. And I'm sure that they know who I am, but I'm hoping that it's an act of courage that will help to bridge relationships where at least I'll know these other folks in the and it's kind of a radical GOP, um, but it's I think an opportunity to reach out a little olive branch here and there. I'm hoping.
Uh, the minute I heard, I admire you. That takes a great deal of courage to do that. I suspect what you'll hear when they talk about biblical citizenship, you'll hear this argument about, and a lot of these folks believe this notion called Arminianism, that
Yes.
people of Christian faith are called to control all aspects of government. And they talk about some things called the seven mountains in order to usher in God's kingdom. What they tend to forget is that the Bible doesn't require any of that, first and foremost. And then it's theologically problematic. And I'll start with that. It's theologically problematic because they assume that God is. I'm trying to frame this the right way because I'm trying to be at least remotely sympathetic and put it at least. The theological problem is that it denies God's sovereignty. And it believes that God can't act in God's own way and own timing to effectuate God's will and divine purposes on the earth. Secondly, it assumes a very narrow reading of the scripture, and that narrow reading, in fact, the narrow reading of the scripture comes from a misunderstanding of the book of Revelation, first and foremost, and about and the notion of the end times and eschatology. And if they were to read Revelation properly, Revelation is really, John of Patmos is really writing about how God will come, and in particular in Revelation, how Christ has come to upend the powers of this world, and it's writing to Christians generally who are being persecuted and who are being marginalized, and to use that as justification to then oppress and marginalize other people absolutely destroys and undermines the very purpose of the scripture, in particular the book of Revelation. In fact, I'm actually starting a sermon series the first Sunday in August at Macedonia on called Divine Dispatches to a Church in Crisis, which is about John's the epistolatory part of Revelation, where John writes to this 7 churches of Asia Minor who have distinct issues that they're dealing with. But at the end of the day, they're understanding the I want to call them Patriot Front, but they might as well be Patriot Front. Any name like that, I'm assuming you're a Christian nationalist, and that's really wrong of me to make that assumption, but I am. I'm going to own that part. Yeah, it's really bad theology, really poor exegesis of the text. Their interpretation, their tool for interpretation is really grounded in this hermeneutic of power, and not power for the sake of the deliverance of and liberation of people who are disinherited, but power for the sake of for excluding people from the glory of God. And that at the end of the day is the most problematic part of their theology, is that their theology excludes people from God's glory as opposed to including people in God's glory. And that's the most problematic part about it. And for any Christian to preach a gospel that's exclusive, it's a terrible thing, because when taking the gospel as a whole, it's all about inclusion, not exclusion. And I suspect that when they talk about, I'm gonna stop because you all weren't expecting, nor do you all need to have a lecture in theology and biblical theology. I'm gonna
No,
dive
no, no.
into
And before, Cheryl, before we get to your question, Nancy's question, I'll read here. You remind me of the voice and work of Reverend William Barber. Can you speak to that? Also, as a member of the Church of Christ, there are many activist churches that align with what you're saying, and those voices need to be louder. Wow, you got a hard act to follow there with the Reverend Dr. Barber.
I mean, that's a challenge I'll take on to follow him. And I'm not surprised we sound very similar because our influences are almost exactly the same theologically and in how we engage in the world. There's this, for instance, we both start with Howard Thurman as the baseline for our understanding of how Jesus interacts in the world with people. Especially if you haven't read Jesus and the Disinherited, whether you believe in Christ or not, Jesus and the Disinherited is a great book to read. The other thing, the other part of your question, with churches like the UCC, the United Church of Christ, I do think there's a struggle, especially with mainline Protestant denominations and more progressive Protestant denominations, is how to make their voices heard in the public square and how to be credible voices in the public square, especially on matters of faith. And this is always my response because I did a talk at Montview Presbyterian Church about this earlier in the year. It was a talk about American civic faith, actually. And I said that people who come from more liberal and progressive faith traditions need to be unafraid to reclaim the language of Jesus in the public faith, in the public square, because too often we're afraid to talk about Jesus and claim Jesus, whereas people like where Jeff was doing the Lord's work actually and going to sit with them and listen to them, they're unashamed, they're unabashed, and putting their version of Christianity out there. So I tell my friends who are UCC and Episcopalian, be unafraid. I think in many ways what's happened in those denominations is, and it's not throwing shade as the kids would say, it's just a brief critique, is that in an effort to be open to everyone, they lost the grounding which allows them to be open to everyone. So I remain fully grounded theologically in my faith. I'm unashamed to be almost, evangelical or evangelistic in how I talk about my faith. It's just what I do. Not for the purposes of making anyone say, I want you to come give their life over to Jesus, but it's more about God has been so good to me in so many ways. It's shameful for me if I don't proclaim how God has been to me in my life. And I think those of us who come from traditions like the UCC, or I'm American Baptist, or the Presbyterian Church USA, PCUSA, just United Methodist, just go right down the line. We have to create an environment where people are empowered to actually proclaim who God is, who Christ is, who the Holy Spirit is in their life. And so hopefully that answered your question, Nancy.
Cheryl, how about you?
Hi, my name is Cheryl. Thank you for this great event. I've really enjoyed it. I wanted to tell Jeff first that I was also married in the Greek Orthodox Church.
Ah, we were different days. May 28th, 1983, right? I might have
Yeah,
beat you by
we
2
won't
years.
talk dates or anything
Yeah,
or
that's
years.
right.
Yeah,
I do kind of
but
like
I
the
did.
go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Lex. I like the icons.
Yes,
Yes.
very powerful.
Yeah, very, very beautiful. Lots of traditional iconography. Yeah. But on a different note, a very different note, I am part of a growing secular community in Colorado. And I am myself, I'm no longer Christian, identify as Christian, and I am an atheist. But in the secular community in Colorado, we have a mixture of humanists, agnostics, atheists, and we all want to be respected for our moral opinions and moral views. And we really want to be part to be able to participate in moral discussions with other people that have the same moral values as us. And I believe that we could align on many of the same values. And I was just going to ask you, Terrence, is there a way that the secular community could be part of any moral discussions in the future?
Oh, absolutely. I think we have to hold space for that because again, my baseline for my discussions are always two baselines. And I feel like I have to say these intentionally now because it's not a given anymore. That America was not founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Hard stop. That's a baseline. Just, I mean, if you don't agree with that, we're not going to have a place where we can discuss. And then the second part is that America is a secular democracy. And so if we're going to talk about reforming democracy, we have to take into account that so many people in this nation, I mean, even if they give lip service to being a person of faith, no matter whether it's Jewish, Muslim, Mormon, or whatever it is, I've met so many folks who are like that who believe they're that because that's what they were born into. But at the end of the day, they're secularist. And I don't even like that word. I need a better word than that. So I think I know there has to be space held for that. And that's the beauty of this is that I want people of faith-rooted people to have conversations with people who also believe there's certain moral imperatives that come with democracy and understand that there's this intersection where we can all agree. Because I don't think it's hard to agree that as a moral statement, all of us, I'm going to rewrite the Declaration of Independence, all folks are created equal and that we're all endowed with certain inalienable rights, among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think we can all agree on that at the end of the day. That's the baseline moral imperative of democracy. And in fact, that's what caused, French guy. And I grew up in DC, so I should not forget his name because there's stuff about him all over DC. Lafayette, Marquis de Lafayette, which caused him when he went back to France to write to Thomas Jefferson and others once the United States got up off the ground to say, hey, you can't believe in these Enlightenment principles, which are also moral principles about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all folks being created equal, and maintain slavery as an institution. That's morally antithetical to the very notion of what it means to be a democracy as we frame democracy in the United States. And there was one founder, and I'm losing his name at this moment, who was so committed to it that upon the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, he freed all his slaves because he said that what we're fighting for is incongruent with what we say we are as a nation. And so back to your statement, Cheryl, there has to be that dialogue. There has to be that interchange because at the end of the day, when we talk about the American democratic experiment, our civic faith, our civic religion, it's really not even a religion, it's our civic faith. It's founded on moral principles that aren't necessarily exclusive to people who are Christian or Jewish or Zoroastrianists. I always like to throw them in because just so in case I ever meet one, they can say I showed them love. Or someone who's an atheist or agnostic or a secularist or a humanist, because there are religious scholars who argue that Thomas Jefferson himself, despite all his other failings, was a humanist.
Mm. Well, I'll give you an amen on that one, Terrence. You know, that we all need to use morality as we move forward. We've got to wrap this up, but one last question. Is there any way we can help you springboard this out, put a little breath into this project?
Well, I'll send the deck around, so any input, thoughts would be helpful, especially where'd Cheryl go? Especially Cheryl, on where you see the intersection on how people, faith-rooted people, can dialogue with folks who don't claim, or same to you, Jeff, who don't claim to hold to any faith tradition. Because I found out an intriguing place that it was a blind spot that I would like to explore more. Although this organization does come from my experience and where I come from, broadly speaking. So that would be very helpful. And then I would love to continue to be in dialogue with you all as I build this out. It's going to take me a little bit to build it out still, because I'm still a practicing attorney, among other things, and going back to church, going back to school to be a doctor of the church. So it's going to be an interesting next 3 years as I finish my doctorate up.
Go Terrence. Wow.
But I plan to have this at least be able to soft launch by the first of the year.
All right. Well, you got us to lean on.
Thank you. And thank you again for the invitation, Beth,
Yeah.
Jeff, all of you. Sister Brown, I can't see you on the screen and not say hi again. And tell Deacon Brown I plan to get over to visit him this week.
Thank
Perfect.
you. Yeah,
Thank
thank
you,
you very
Terrence.
much.
Thank you.
We'll be in
Y'all have
touch.
a good day.
Thank you.
Hope we can work more together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.